Imagine dying today. For most of us, that means a quiet ceremony, some flowers, maybe a headstone with your name and 2 dates on it. That's it. Modern death is simple, almost minimal. Now imagine dying in ancient Egypt instead. Your body preserved for 70 days, prayers recited over you for weeks, gold placed over your face. An entire journey mapped out for your soul, step by step, like a route on a map. 2 civilizations, thousands of years apart, with almost opposite answers to the same question. What actually happens after you die? Let's find out what the Egyptians believed, and why they were willing to build entire monuments around the answer.
Here's the first big difference. Today, when we talk about death, most modern belief systems describe it as either an ending or a single instant transition. You're here, then you're somewhere else immediately. Egyptians saw it differently. Death wasn't an ending. It was the start of a journey, an actual physical feeling trip through the underworld called Duat. Think of it almost like a modern road trip with checkpoints. Except instead of gas stations, you're facing gates guarded by supernatural beings, each one testing whether you deserve to continue. Miss a checkpoint, fail a test, and your journey could end permanently. Pass them all, and you'd reach the final and most important stop, the Hall of Judgment. So what actually happened there? Here's the moment everything came down to. Your heart, believed to hold your memories, decisions, and moral character, was placed on one side of a golden scale. On the other side, a single feather, representing Maat, the concept of truth and balance. If your heart was lighter than the feather, meaning you'd lived honestly and fairly, you passed. If it was heavier, weighed down by lies, cruelty, or wrongdoing, a creature called Ammit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippo, was waiting to devour it on the spot. No heart, no afterlife. Permanently. Compare that to how modern people often think about a life review, a private, personal reflection. For Egyptians, it wasn't private at all. It was a literal physical measurement, judged by gods, with real consequences hanging in the balance. So if you passed, where did you actually end up?
If your heart passed the test, you didn't float on a cloud or enter some abstract paradise. You arrived somewhere surprisingly familiar, the field of reeds, essentially a perfected version of the life you already knew. Fields to farm, a home, family around you, the Nile nearby. Same basic setup as daily life in Egypt, just better. No flooding disasters, no failed harvests, no suffering. Think about that for a second. A modern person picturing paradise might imagine no work at all, endless rest. Egyptians pictured something closer to their actual daily routine, just perfected. Which tells you something important. The goal wasn't escaping life. It was continuing it, forever, in its best possible form. But here's a problem. If the afterlife literally required farming, cooking, and labor, who was doing all that work for a pharaoh or a wealthy noble who'd never lifted a hoe in real life?
Here's a clever solution. Tombs, especially wealthy ones, were often filled with small statuettes called Ushabti, sometimes numbering in the hundreds. Each one was believed to magically activate in the afterlife and perform labor on your behalf, if you were ever called upon to work. It's honestly not that different from how modern life works, if you think about it sideways. We use tools, apps, and hired services to avoid doing labor ourselves. Egyptians just started that trend a few thousand years early, using magic instead of machines. And it wasn't just labor substitutes. Tombs were packed with food, furniture, jewelry, even games. Everything needed for a full, comfortable existence. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. They were preparing, in extremely literal terms for another entire life. Which raises an obvious question. How confident were they really that any of this would actually work?
Modern belief systems vary wildly from person to person. Many people today hold uncertain or mixed views about what happens after death. Egyptian society, by contrast, treated the afterlife as closer to a settled fact, reinforced constantly through religion, art, writing, and government. The Book of the Dead, not a single book, but a collection of spells and instructions, was placed in tombs specifically to help guide the deceased through the underworld's trials. Basically, a survival guide for the afterlife, written down because the stakes were considered absolutely real. And this belief shaped everyday life, too, not just death. Living a just, honest life wasn't only about being a good person for its own sake. It was training for the final exam. Every choice mattered, because eventually it would be measured, literally, against a feather.
Compare that to modern life, where morality and the afterlife are often treated as separate questions entirely. For Egyptians, they were the same question, asked and answered every single day. So, back to where we started. Modern death, quiet, simple, largely unknown. Ancient Egyptian death, a structured journey, a moral test, and an entire second life waiting on the other side, complete with fields, family, and magical employees to do the hard work. Different tools, different eras, wildly different rituals. But underneath it, the same basic hope. That this isn't really the end. That who you were and how you lived actually mattered beyond this one lifetime. 4,000 years later, we still don't have a definitive answer. But the Egyptians committed to theirs so completely, they built pyramids, wrote survival guides, and carved their beliefs into stone, determined to make sure that whatever happened next, they'd be ready for it. And if this journey through ancient belief made you curious about what's next, there's a simple way to keep exploring with us. Just hit subscribe so you don't miss where we travel to next.